Oh, hi there, viewer. I have been looking for a new place to move to because, well, there has been a few events in Canada which has made me feel rather uncomfortable. So now I'm looking for a new place to call home. Of course, the first and most important quality I'm looking for is whether the country I'm looking to move to is a liberal one or not. However, there are multiple types of liberalism, and depending on what you value, you might prefer one type of liberalism over another. Speaking of which, most of the stuff I'll be talking about today comes from the book Freedom from Fear, An Incomplete History of Liberalism by Alan S. Kahan. And for any of you interested in liberalism and the role fear played in its advancement, I highly recommend it. Anyway, enough of this nerdy stuff. Let's get into the edutainment. I know I have said Rawls has the best definition of liberalism and is the one and only real liberal out there. But as Ronald Reagan once said, my heart and best intentions still tell me that is true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not. There are 4 other important figures in liberalism of the 21st century, all of whom have contributed as much as Rawls to liberalism, but in very different ways. Their theories and contributions produced theories of liberalism which were drastically different than Rawls's, and so new versions of liberalism were born. The 4 figures are Robert Nozick, a philosopher and a colleague of Rawls at Harvard University, a Nobel Prize winner by the name of Morgan Freeman. No, wait. That's not right. Milton Friedman. My bad. Very different guy, and not as cool as Morgan at parties, unfortunately. And the last 2 are, oh god, Judith Shikai? This lady with the hard last name, okay? She was a philosopher and political theorist at Harvard University as well. And finally, we have Cambridge University's Knightsbridge philosophy professor, Bernard Williams. I'm not going to focus on Bernard and Judith in this video because in a lot of ways, they're central to the entire book, especially Judith. And I don't want to give any spoilers. In this video, we are going to focus on the differences between Rawls, Nozick, and Friedman, and how their respective theories resulted in the formation of egalitarian liberalism, libertarian liberalism, and neoliberalism. Let's start with Rawls because, well, he's Rawls, and he's number 1. First, let me say this. Because Rawls's theory, I think rightly, can be called egalitarian liberalism, that does not mean he was a communist or a socialist. For Rawls, the most important quality of justice is fairness. And this fairness generally materializes in the form of fair distribution. The central theme of John Rawls' theory of justice and liberalism is dignity. And the ultimate source of fear which could jeopardize one's dignity was inequality of conditions, which could include both tangible and intangible things. But most people who discuss Rawlsian conception of fairness discuss it in terms of material equality. The reason for focusing on, to use a Marxian term, material conditions is that for you as a liberal citizen to live a dignified life, you need at least the bare minimum of necessities like food, house, and a PlayStation 5. This egalitarianism of necessities became the defining feature of Rawls's conception of justice as fairness, and he proceeded to build a political regime around it. This does not mean that inequality was not okay. In fact, distribution of conditions will inevitably lead to some form of inequality. Inequality needs to be justified in terms which benefits the least advantageous members of society the most possible, because if the poor were left to their own devices and the rich to theirs, the wealthy would inevitably dominate the entire society. As you can imagine, Johnny Boy was okay with governmental interventions if they were meant to help the least advantageous members of society. Such government interventions would generally take the form of social safety nets. I know you might be thinking, this sounds like communism. No, Rawls still firmly believed the right to own property, and from a Rawlsian view, it would not be permissible for government to transgress boundaries which could cause political instability in pursuit of distribution of conditions. Rawls had his detractors, and the most famous of them was Robert Nozick. Nozick found what Rawls endorsed as a potential justification for totalitarianism because, from Bob's view, every state is ultimately a potential totalitarian regime. Rawls and Nozick were colleagues at Harvard, and Nozick wrote his book Anarchy, State and Utopia in opposition to Rawls's magnum opus Theory of Justice. Nozick rejected egalitarianism of Rawls and argued that distribution of conditions should be based around a mutually agreed upon contract between individuals, and any and all interventions by the state for distribution of conditions was immoral because it was punishing excellence. The government may only interfere when one individual's contract with another is violated, like when one party exercises coercion to enter into a contract. And interestingly enough, for Nozick, this intervention has no time limit. So from a libertarian point of view, reparations for those who had their labor stolen from them was not only justifiable, but arguably morally required. Nozick's focus was primarily on the individual and the procedures which allowed them to improve their living conditions. In other words, the rules of the game. This brings us to the third and last thinker of today, the economist Milton Friedman. Friedman did not directly make a theory of liberalism like Rawls or Nozick did, but his economic ideas were incredibly influential in the formation of what we call today neoliberalism. Basically, the entire focus of neoliberalism is on the economy and economic improvement. So, neoliberals launched an aggressive campaign in defense of free market. Interestingly enough, Friedman had some suggestions which we today might not consider part of the free market ideology, such as free education via vouchers for children, and those who want to pursue non-vocational education like philosophy. This is because every citizen should have basic literacy and math skills, and those who choose to pursue social sciences and philosophy might not gain money-making skills, but they gain skills that can help make the country better via fixing political and social problems when needed. Free basic education and free education in social sciences and humanities would ensure that liberal societies remain stable. Friedman and neoliberals he inspired also advocated government intervention, but only to make sure that the market remains free. Unlike the libertarianism of Nozick, who argued that government should be as hands-off as possible. But unlike Rawls, neoliberals were not a fan of distribution of wealth at all. Government intervention is only okay when it is meant to keep the market free. These were the three basic branches of liberalism I wanted to talk to you guys about today. None of these are perfect, except Rawls, of course. He's Jesus. They all have their flaws and benefits, and it really comes down to what it is that you want your liberal society to accomplish. If you want a society where no one dies of hunger, then Rawlsian egalitarian liberalism is the way to go. If you want a society which encourages excellence, where individuals who have managed to acquire skills or have innate talents that allows them to rise above the rest can achieve incredible feats, then Nozick's libertarian liberalism is your go-to. On the other hand, if you are primarily focused on the economy, then Friedman's neoliberalism is the regime you're looking for. It all comes down to your preference and the society which you envision yourself in. Again, none of these regimes are perfect and none of them are illiberal. They are different branches of liberalism. If you see someone refer to Friedman or Nozick as an authoritarian or Rawls as a commie socialist, you should probably close the Twitch app and go read Kahan's book because it explains these concepts really clearly. As for me, I'm going to pack my bags because politics in Canada has become a bit hectic for my taste.